Today, we're going to be talking about sensation versus perception, and that's the unit we will be on. So sensation, right? Sensation is the process by which our sensory system, so we're talking about our eyes, our ears, and all the other sensory organs we have. Remember, we have 5 senses. And our nervous system receives stimuli or information from the environment. So it's our awareness of the world through our senses. So sensation, that's your raw material. That's the raw of any of your 5 senses, whatever that raw thing is, what you hear, what you see, feel, without any interpretation of it. It's just that raw information that's coming in through your sensory organs, through your sensory cortexes, and parts of the brain that deal with your senses. So sensation uses bottom-up processing, right? So we're going to talk about something bottom-up processing and top-down processing, similar, so don't get them confused. So sensation uses bottom-up processing because it information processing that focuses on raw material entering through the eyes, ears, and other organs of sensation. So bottom-up processing is just the raw material. So it's pretty much like sensation, right? Sensation is that raw, stimuli that you receive. Well, this is processing based just on that raw information. There's no expectations or other influences during your interpretation of it. Perception, the other part of the unit, right? Perception is how you make sense of your sensory information, right? It's the process of selecting, organizing, and interpreting sensory information. So perception is the interpretation of a sensation. I would remember that. You might find that on a test. Right? So, we get all this raw material coming in, but you need to make sense of it, and that's what perception is, right? Your brain is constantly trying to make sense of whatever it's getting, right? We've talked about that before, we'll talk about it again. There's all this stimuli coming into your brain, and that's your brain's job, is to make sense of all the stuff it sees. So let's say, we go outside, we look at a cloud. And so we're all looking at the same cloud, right? That's a sensation. But I might be like, oh, hey, look, that looks like Snoopy, or that looks like a dragon, right? That's my interpretation of that sensation, right? So that's my perception. And it can all change, and we'll do a few different activities throughout this unit. One might be interpreting a song, where we all hear the same song, but yet we might have a different interpretation on that song, or something we've seen, or think about like maybe a conversation you've had with a group of people, and then you've talked to a friend about that conversation later, and your friend might be like, oh, they were really upset about something, and that was not your perception of it at all, right? That wasn't your interpretation of it. So we all see the same thing. That's our sensation. That stimuli is the same, but our perception, that interpretation of it is different. So perception uses top-down processing. That is information processing that focuses on expectations and experiences and interpreting incoming sensory information. So when we're looking at those clouds, you look at those clouds, you don't really see anything. But when I'm like, hey, that looks like Snoopy, now you're like, oh yeah, that really does look like Snoopy. Right? So, that's top-down processing, is where you use those expectations, or maybe based off past experiences, to interpret something that you see. All right, so make sure perception uses top-down processing. And there's a few activities we'll do, one of which I can't do through a video like this, but I'll do it when we meet in person, through the video chat, is we'll listen to music backwards, right? And you'll listen to it first just raw, right? That would be the bottom-up processing. And then I'll give you the lyrics, something to listen for, and that'll be top-down processing. So would you drink from this water fountain? Look at it. It's a toilet. I got a feeling most of you guys probably said no. Yet, this water fountain is probably cleaner than a lot of water fountains you've drank out of before. But just because our perception of it looks like a toilet, therefore, what do we do with toilets? We go to the bathroom in them. So we can't possibly drink water out of the toilet, right? Because that's our perception, that's our interpretation of this water fountain. Even though it's perfectly clean, it's perfectly fine. But we always see that. Think about even the different foods. They have foods that look like poop or something like that, but yet they're totally edible. A lot of people are like, I can't eat that. I can't eat that. Just because of our perception of what it looks like. Doesn't matter what it actually is, but that's our interpretation of it. Do subliminal messages work? Um, kind of, and here's why, right? And kind of not. Subliminal messages make two assumptions. The first assumption is that we can unconsciously sense the subliminal, right? Subliminal is like things below the threshold. So can we unconsciously sense the subliminal message? That part is true, right? You can subliminally, you know, subconsciously be aware of it. But now, number two, without our awareness, this stimuli have suggestive powers. Now, this part is false. You know, they might flash something or say something, and it might reach your subconscious. But yeah, it can't suggest. It doesn't have suggestive powers, and here's why. So subliminal messages can affect how we feel about something for just a short period of time. But it cannot persuade us to actually go out and do something. Because remember, and this is key, right? Weak stimuli have weak responses, and strong stimuli have strong responses. So usually a subliminal message is a very weak stimuli. So I always think about the like movie theaters. Supposedly they used to flash like a popcorn and like a large drink or something like that during the movie, and you weren't even aware that they flashed it, but it reached your subconscious, and so therefore it'd make you hungry and thirsty, and you go do it. If you've ever watched Saved by the Bell, they did a whole episode where Zach, flashed stuff up there, and I think made all the girls fall in love with him, but it actually didn't work. And that's what this is. It doesn't actually work in this, right? Because it's so weak. You might think about it for a second, but it's not strong enough to actually influence you to do something. Where if they had like popcorn smell coming out of your seat that was very strong, now that'd be a strong stimuli. Now that could influence you to go get some popcorn, right? Because that's a strong stimuli. Where if they just flash something real fast, you might think about it for a second, but then that'll go away because it's a weak stimuli. All right, types of threshold. So the first bullet point, this definition, make sure you get this right here, right? A threshold is an edge or a boundary. It's an edge or a boundary. So psychologists are interested in our boundaries thresholds when it comes to our senses, right? Because we want to know what's our bare minimum that we can sense. So once you pass that threshold, kind of like a neuron firing, right? So we talked about neurons, they either fire or they don't fire. So, if you're touching someone and they don't feel it, that means the neurons haven't fired yet. But as soon as they feel it, now the neurons are firing. Same thing, like that's a threshold. Either you feel it or you don't feel it. So that's the edge or boundary, how hard or how loud you have to be to actually be able to feel or hear something. And so that's what we're going to talk about is what's the edge, what's the bare minimum that we can, our senses can detect. So absolute threshold, this is the definition. Make sure you get this because we're going to talk about difference threshold as well, which is different. So absolute threshold is the minimum stimulation necessary for a person to detect a particular stimulus 50% of the time. So of course they've done some experiments on this, and this is what they've found out. So of our five senses, what are the absolute thresholds? For vision, the absolute threshold for vision is a candle flame seen from 30 miles away on a clear, dark night. So 30 miles, that's pretty far. So think about, that's from like Harvey to like Joliet. So imagine being able to see a candle flame in Joliet from Harvey. Now, obviously, we can't see it because we have a lot of buildings in the way. We're by a city, so you have all the lights coming off. That's why you can't see like stars in the city. But if you go away from the city, you can see all the stars because the light kind of blocks that. So this would be like if you go out to like a country road, right, a rural road where they just go straight for miles and miles and miles. You could see a candle flame from 30 miles away, right? Nothing in your way. Hearing. You can hear the absolute threshold for hearing is the tick of a watch at 20 feet. Tick of a watch at 20 feet away. Taste. 1 teaspoon of sugar and 2 gallons of water. So just think about how small it is. You can actually taste it. All right. So now think about I always think about like Kool-Aid and how much sugar we tend to put in Kool-Aid. It actually calls only for a cup, but we know a lot of us put a lot more of that in there. Right? A lot of times we put 2 cups, even more in. Now, that's not even a gallon. So, but you can taste sugar, 1 teaspoon in 2 gallons of water. So that's how fine our taste is. Smell. 1 drop of perfume throughout a 3-room apartment. Just 1 little drop. Now, think about all those people in the hallways. They're spraying that stuff all over the place. Right? It's like you're walking down the hallway and you run into a wall of perfume. All you need is 1 little drop, and it does the job. And the last of our senses is touch, right? A bee's wing falling on your cheek from a height of about 1/2 an inch. So a bee wing, very thin. You can actually feel that on your cheek from about 1/2 an inch, or at least half the time. That'd be absolute threshold. So difference threshold, right? Difference threshold is the minimum difference that a person can detect between two stimuli 50% of the time. Also called just noticeable difference, or J&D. Make sure you know that, right? Because on the test, you might see difference threshold, you might see J&D, you might see just noticeable difference. So make sure you know it's all the same thing. So this is, like I said, absolute threshold is just being able to sense any stimulus 50% of the time. Difference threshold is being able to detect that stimulus has changed, right? That it is changed. So if you put your hand on a burner and it's turned on, the first time you feel something, that's going to be absolute threshold. But once you notice that that burner is changing temperature, it's getting hotter, now that's difference threshold. So absolute threshold is just noticing any sensory information. Difference threshold is noticing that it has changed. So let's say you're listening to music. Well, as soon as you can hear music, that is absolute threshold, right? Because that's your senses. Once you notice the volume going up or down, now that is difference threshold because there's been a change in the stimulus. Sensory adaptation is the diminished sensitivity as a result of constant stimulation. So if a stimulus is constant and unchanging, eventually a person may fail to respond to it. So all this is that you get used to your senses, right? So, we constantly have different sensations going on through our body every second, right? Well, some of them we're so used to, we don't even respond to it anymore because we don't, right? You get used to it. And here's some examples, right? Think about your watch, right? Move your watch up on your wrist an inch or put your ring on a different finger. You'll feel it at first, but later on you won't notice it. Your senses have adapted to it. So if you've never worn jewelry before, first time you put on a watch, it's going to be weird. But then after a while, you don't even realize you have it on. Rings. So a lot of guys, when they get married, they've never worn a ring before. So you're constantly playing with it, right? Constantly playing with it because it's something new. Well, then after a while, you don't even realize you have it on. And a lot of times you have to check to see if you have it on. Could be the same thing with glasses, right? Think about glasses. A lot of times people are like, oh, where are my glasses at? Well, they're on your head. So if you've ever worn glasses before, you know a lot of times you get so used to them, you don't even realize that they're there anymore. Even clothes in general, right? A lot of times when you first put on clothes or even uncomfortable clothes, they bother you, but you get used to them. You don't even realize that you have them on anymore. This is also similar to like if you've ever jumped into a lake, right? When you first get into a lake, it's really cold, but then after like a few seconds even, and maybe a minute or two, you get used to it and it feels perfectly fine. This is because of sensory adaptation. Your body gets used to it. Same, it's the opposite as well, right? Let's say you get into a hot tub or like a hot bath or something like that. At first you get in, it's really hot, but then after about 30 seconds, you get used to it. That is sensory adaptation. And don't worry about writing down nose blind. That's a video I will post. Selective attention. All right, this is focusing conscious awareness on a particular stimulus to the exclusions of others. So it's the ability to focus on one stimulus at a time. Allows a person to function in a world filled with many stimuli. So people with ADD or ADHD have trouble doing this. So like I've mentioned numerous times, we have all these different stimuli coming in. Well, our brains, and especially like, if you remember the different parts of the brain using the reticular formation, right, that helps us, kind of not pay attention to those random stimulus that we don't need to, right? It helps us focus on whatever the important task is, whether it's listening to your teacher or whatever it might be, right? That's selective attention, right? It's the ability to focus on one stimulus at a time. So a couple of vocab words that you should know, right? So at any moment, we focus our awareness on only a limited aspect of all that we're capable of experiencing. And so there's a couple things that we talk about. One is cocktail party effect, and that's the ability to attend selectively to only one voice among many. Right? So you ever notice if you're ever at a party, how you can focus just on that one person you have a conversation with and able to ignore everyone else? Right? That'd be cocktail party effect. Or the opposite, or the same thing, but another example would be like, I'm trying to talk to my wife at a party or something, and she's not listening to me because she's trying to, eavesdrop on the next conversation there, right? Cocktail party effect. Change blindness. I got a lot of videos I'll show you for this one. Is a phenomenon that occurs when a person viewing a visual scene apparently fails to detect large changes in the scene. And so, like I said, I'll show you a couple of short, like murder mystery clips and things like that, where there's a lot of changes that happen, but yet we're not aware of what's going on. And so, another thing I'm gonna have to do when we meet, when we do a video chat, is I'm gonna show you this Necker cube, and you're gonna see something flying through it. Well, it's going to look like it's actually flipping, right? So it's like a little cube, like a 3D cube you can draw. It's going to look like it's flipping, but yet it's not, right? The cube itself isn't moving, but you can only interpret the cube, like the front side of the cube, one way at a time. So when an object flies through another direction, it's going to look like the front of the cube has changed, but really that's just your interpretation of it. Your brain can't see it two ways at once. And so I'll probably have to, because that's a website, so I'll probably have to show that when we get together. There's a video I can post as well.